We will be starting, and so first off, a very good morning and good afternoon to all of our guests dialing in, and thank you so much for joining us today. First off, I'd like to welcome all of you to today's webinar on mitigating the impact of COVID-19 and other supply chain disruptions, where we will be exploring how companies should respond and prepare for the disruption to your supply caused by the COVID-19 and how to remain resilient and agile in an event like the COVID-19 outbreak or even any other supply chain disruptions that may arise in the future. Moving on. Now, let me just quickly bring you through some general instructions. For the purpose of this webinar, only computer audio will be used, and all participants except for the presenters will be muted. We will have a Q&A at the end of the webinar. So, at any time throughout the webinar, if you have a question, please feel free to post them using the question window, which is located on your GoToWebinar panel to your right. And you'll see a question function right there. Ask us a question and we will answer them in our Q&A session at the end of the webinar. And next, I would like to introduce our speakers for today. So today we have with us Melis Teksan, who is our Director of Supply Chain for EEMA and APAC, who received her Ph.D. in Industrial and System Engineering Department from the University of Florida. And throughout her career, Melis has combined her academic research with real-life industry challenges, and her areas of expertise lies in production planning and inventory management, dynamic lot sizing with convex cost, and planning with economies of scale. So in general, she is interested in research problems that are very relevant to real-life industry practice. And in the course of her career, she has implemented successful projects at numerous major corporations worldwide. And today we also have with us Sanjay Nair, who will be moderating the webinar. Sanjay is a senior technology executive with extensive experience building and leading high-performance organizations in the enterprise software industry. And in his current role as the regional director for APAC, Sanjay is responsible for driving the growth and development for ICRON across the APAC region. And to date, Sanjay has spent the last 20 years in similar leadership positions, and he has been invested in the intersection between business and technology, and is highly regarded for his achievements and expertise in steering organizations through startup, growth, and turnarounds. And then moving on, before we get into the best parts, here's just a very quick introduction about ICRON and what we do. So ICRON was founded close to 30 years ago, and we had a vision to empower every single company in the world to achieve their business goals with one software. And we are today a leading company that helps businesses make optimized decisions using algorithmic advanced planning and optimization software. So typically our software solutions are used to address a wide range of supply chain decision-making challenges that ranges from forecasting and demand planning, all through production planning and scheduling, workforce and logistics planning and scheduling. So in essence, it powers end-to-end decision-making and optimization of resources, workforce, and processes in a unified planning environment across all planning horizons and in just any industry that you can think of. And to date, we've had over 500 implementations at more than 100 customer sites across various industries globally, and we're present in the Netherlands, Turkey, Singapore, and Malaysia. So without further ado, let me hand this over to Sanjay and Melis to bring you through this webinar. Sanjay, all yours.
Well, thank you so much for the introduction, Charmaine. I am thrilled to be part of this webinar with Melis. I would also like to thank all our participants for taking time out and being here today. I am sure all of you must have been spending a lot of time finding out about how to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 and other disruptions to your supply chain. You are reading the papers, looking up the internet, watching news on television, sharing messages on WhatsApp, and even consulting friends and experts. And as a result, there are bound to be several questions that are now causing concern and crying out for answers. Those are the sort of things that Melis and I will be discussing today. Now, a lot has changed in the weeks since doctors in Wuhan, China, noticed a cluster of cases involving a mysterious pneumonia-like illness. That illness has since traveled around the world with remarkable efficiency, now a pandemic that has killed thousands, placed millions under quarantine, caused lockdowns across the world, and battered global markets. Needless to say, this is an extraordinary time. There is a lot of uncertainty and fear around the world right now as we collectively fight COVID-19. All businesses are facing unprecedented challenges as the impact on the global economy continues. Supply chains have been completely disrupted, travels restricted, and events are cancelled. It is not business as usual in any sense of the phrase. Now, epidemics can cost billions of US dollars. In the wake of the 2003 SARS epidemic, the World Bank estimated the global GDP falling by $40 billion. The cost of the West Africa Ebola outbreak is estimated at $53 billion from the mortality and economic impact, similar to the cost of H1N1 at somewhere between $45 to $55 billion. Now, the Asian Development Bank has recently warned that the global cost of the coronavirus pandemic could be as high as $4.1 trillion or almost 5% of global GDP, depending on the disease spread through Europe, the US, and other major economies. It is triggering long-lasting fiscal shocks, which threaten stability and economic growth. We are seeing the effects of COVID-19 on tourism, which is almost at a standstill, household and labor markets, which are affected by rising unemployment, lost incomes, and school closures, and trade is suffering as a result of quarantine, lockdowns, and border control measures. Global manufacturing is seeing the steepest rate of contraction. Then, more jaw-dropping is Monday's collapse in a key segment of US oil trading. So together, this is causing all sorts of supply chain disruptions and very likely reversing years of growth and development. Melis, you had a question for me?
Yes, Sanjay, I do. We are in the middle of this huge, unexpected global disruption. I wonder if that is the time to rethink and maybe to transform the design of global supply chains. What do you think?
That's a good question, Melis. Well, until very recently, most global companies could base their supply chain designs on the assumption that materials flow freely globally, enabling them to source, produce, and distribute products at the lowest cost locations around the world. Now, the COVID-19 crisis has challenged the validity of this fundamental assumption. Specifically, it illustrates the vulnerability of having so many sources of supplies located in one area and an area that is far away from critical markets, such as in Europe and Americas. Needless to say, some companies have gone too far in the relentless pursuit of cost efficiencies and in the process made their supply chains overly fragile and unable to withstand sudden unexpected disruptions. Now they need to scale back on efficiency and accept that they may need some level of inbuilt resilience to the external shocks as we are seeing today. So the current crisis is only going to elevate the importance of fundamentally questioning and evaluating on a constant basis the structure and design of the supply chain and analyzing the trade-offs between cost, service, and risk. We have to work through this crisis in the short term. And of course, everyone across the companies we work with are working really hard to get through the crisis and minimize the impact of disruption. The key thing to do is to step back and reflect on what could be done differently so you as an organization could be in a different situation or could adopt to these kinds of situations in a different way. If your fundamental policies, if your fundamental design of where you're producing, your fundamental capacity decisions, if your fundamental frequency of replenishment are flawed, it doesn't matter what your planning processes are going to yield. So it is critical to use this opportunity as a call to action and think about the design of the supply chain and structure of the supply chain, align that with the business strategy, and do that on an ongoing basis, and do that with the facts, insights, and value from data, and with the right level of engagement and involvement with the broader organization. The way I see it, a model that enables companies to rapidly reconfigure their supply chains and be agile and responsive to rapidly changing global trade policies, supply dynamics, and disruptions is going to be vital. This is where simulation, what-if stochastic models are extremely powerful in helping companies play out what specific decisions could look like in the real world, taking into account variability. That is the power of simulation. Use it. Very few companies I see today being able to leverage simulation in their strategic decision making. It is an underused capability. So leverage the power in certain use cases of having the self-learning mechanisms, especially when you're dealing with the unexpected. That's where a lot of the core concepts around artificial intelligence and machine learning can help. But you know, Melis, none of these can happen without strong leadership from the top. Leaders will need to be fearless in adopting new modes of operation in the future, and the climate for making major change will never be better than in the coming weeks and months. I think boardrooms and CEOs need to drive this mandate and provide the sponsorship to their heads of supply chain in really stepping back and looking at what is our business strategy, what are we trying to do as a company, who are we serving, what markets are we serving, how are we differentiating ourselves, and then based on that, really have a discussion and debate, and then analyze the options for what design of a supply chain makes the most sense. Melis, business leaders around the world are searching for a path through the uncertainty and into recovery. Would you be able to highlight the conversations that are taking place right now in the midst of COVID-19, and what do they mean for the supply chain?
Yes, Sanjay. For the last few weeks, I had many conversations with current and future ICRON users, and I have seen that the concerns and the questions of supply chain professionals were very similar. Orders were closing, materials and components necessary for production could not be received, operations were majorly disrupted, and these were very common occurrences in the supply side. When it comes to demand side, we see different responses from different industries. Industries such as aviation, high-tech, consumer electronics, automotive, metals have seen many order cancellations. However, industries like FMCG, food, cleaning products, some chemicals, health supplies, pharmaceuticals have seen a tremendous peak in demand in a very short time span. And all my conversations followed by the honest desperation of all supply chain professionals. I heard them all say, "We don't know what to do." By the way, I knew that this was the first shock of COVID-19 talking, because immediately after, necessary actions were taken one by one. We will come to that part later on, but let's try to understand for a moment, what did COVID-19 do to supply chains? Everybody, let's take a deep breath. Supply chains are broken. They do not function as we are used to them to function. You have also mentioned this, Sanjay. Maybe it is time to rethink the design of supply chains such that they are more robust and less prone to vulnerabilities. And there was one more effect of coronavirus on supply chains, which I think has pretty significant effect on how we try to handle this event. Supply chain professionals are sent home mostly. Each and every supply chain professional is now in the middle of a constantly growing communication traffic through online meeting tools, calls with production site, calls with suppliers, distributors, etc. But convenient face-to-face meetings are not there anymore. Collecting information from various sources, understanding the situation, and creating a response accordingly are much more cumbersome today than ever. Hence, the need for an intelligent and integrated supply chain decision-making platform is obvious than ever. But moving on, what did the ICRON users do once the first shock was over? Immediate necessary actions are taken. Number one, safety and health of employees. Therefore, majority of white-collar personnel is sent home. And for the employees who need to perform field service, production, delivery, etc., these safety regulations are enhanced. Many companies had to slow down the production due to safety reasons. Some took more extreme measures and stopped the production for a while, some of them for several weeks, some of them for a month. Number of shifts are lowered. The number of employees working in a shift are also decreased due to social distancing regulations. We said supply of goods, materials were disrupted. Therefore, alternative sourcing options are considered. And the ones with peak demand especially must deliver more with their reduced capacity. Well, let me tell you what type of technologies ICRON users utilize to take control of the situation. Moving on. So scenario analysis, resilience planning, visibility, collaboration, and a quick sense and response. Let's go over these one by one. Very recently, I had a conversation with a supply chain leader, and she said, in a situation like this, predictions, forecasts are nonsense. We have to think about different future scenarios and evaluate possible outcomes. And I could not agree more. We experience very sudden, drastic changes in both supply and demand conditions. And what we experience currently looks and feels nothing like we have seen before. Therefore, we need to do more than relying on statistical predictions while managing our future. And let's move on. And Sanjay, you also mentioned simulation capability would be an important asset. I would like to add to that. The technology that supports this capability should be fast and efficient in terms of computational time and effort. Because when you think about it, we are talking about billions of possibilities that might happen in the future. And considering their likelihoods and variabilities, we evaluate them one by one. And in the end, we have a plan for any version of possible future. And this is also a key to proactive planning. In that case, you have a plan ready in each case, whichever version of the future occurs.
I understand that, Melis. So what you're saying is that companies that continue to require long planning cycle times, for example, will increasingly find themselves in a firefighting mode. So I think this is where continuous alignment through a real-time planning and execution environment means the ability to quickly react to emerging news and redirect demand or supplies in an optimal fashion as and when the change occurs, isn't it?
Yes, yes, exactly. And we will also come to that part, Sanjay, in a minute. Let's move on. Let's take a moment and think, how resilient are our businesses? How quickly can we adapt to changing conditions and respond to challenging disruptions while maintaining corporate sustainability? This is the big question today for all industries. We already mentioned that it is important to have a plan for any future scenario. But a plan is just a bunch of numbers, calculated numbers, if they don't lead us to decisions that ensure business resilience. Let me give you an example, and many people from our audience today would be very familiar with such an example. Suppose you have a material purchase requirements for the upcoming 6 months based on your customer orders and forecasts. And you will do your purchasing according to this plan. So you will invest money on materials, planning to manufacture goods using them and hoping to sell them in your customer base and generate revenue out of it. Customer orders, are they real? Is there a possibility of cancellation? And let's talk about forecasts. What is the probability of them to realize? And what percentage of your material procurement is for a pre-order of a customer or for a forecast order with a very low probability? The answer leads you to the risk of your investment on materials. You can ask similar questions for your capacity allocations. The answer will lead you to the opportunity that you might miss with the current usage plan of your high-valued assets. Mitigating risk and capturing the opportunity in disruption, these are the desired outcomes of resilience planning in supply chains. And these are only possible with advanced technologies such as dynamic global pegging, scenario management, and simulation, as you have also mentioned. Yeah. Let's move on to visibility and collaboration. You can't fix an issue that you can't detect, and you can detect the issue if you can't see it. Hence, the visibility is extremely important. End-to-end visibility is ensured by collecting data from various sources and transforming them to relevant business information. And technically speaking, an information network is created underneath. Hence, any supply chain business issue can be detected and solved on the spot. Collaboration is handled many levels. Collaboration of people, collaboration of departments and functions, collaboration of decision processes, and systems such as ERP systems, MES systems, planning softwares, etc., etc. And this is how ICRON becomes the single source of truth for decision makers of an organization. I have a tiny note with rich content for supply chain readers out there. Create a single source of truth for all supply chain functions and break the silos within your organization. And we all know many crazy things around the world are happening today. On demand side, we have seen some sudden drops and also very high peaks in different industries. And the technology that we are talking about senses the peaks and drops and recommends responses to these changes by propagating the effects of these changes to the supply plans. And so as you also mentioned, Sanjay, earlier, so you need to understand what is actually happening and you need to propagate those effects correctly to update your plans, and so that you can always work with the current up-to-date plans. And this also happens in the supply side, by the way. Let's move on to the next slide. Drops, disruptions are very common today in the supply side. And in that case, the effects are propagated to demand side so that the decision makers can know which revenue streams are affected by the disruptions and they can act accordingly. Here again, another tiny note with rich content. An intelligent supply chain planning and optimization platform should sense the erratic changes both in supply and demand conditions. And this is the way to tackle demand and supply volatility and to increase agility of your supply chain. Yes, back to you, Sanjay.
Thank you, Melis. It has been insightful to understand how technological innovation is being used on multiple fronts to help these customers assess their supply chain network, sourcing options, demand forecasting, supply management, and more to manage massive variability and to establish a more centralized risk function. Now, if I look at Asia and in Singapore, for example, we are starting to see more and more companies re-engineer their business operations and processes digitalizing, retraining workers, and even temporarily redeploying them during the downtime. The reason for it is to enable them to emerge stronger when the economy recovers. Likewise, there are many companies, despite being hit so hard, they have found strength, retained staff, and pressed on with innovation. I would say this is resilience in action. Now, Melis, it is beyond doubt how unanticipated supply chain disruptions can have a severe negative impact, leading to both tactical and strategic consequences for a company. Would you be able to share a use case amongst ICRON's customers around how they have applied the right innovation capabilities with effective strategies to quickly mitigate impact of such a disruption?
Oh, yes, Sanjay. I will tell you a story from several years ago. However, I should note that this was not a global pandemic situation. Actually, this was more a point disruption that one of our long-term users experienced a while ago. Once upon a time, there was a fire on a cargo ship carrying very valuable components for production of a consumer electronics manufacturing company. Immediately after receiving the information, the damage was detected. They knew the component orders in the burning containers. They knew which production orders were planned to use these components, and they knew which customer orders are affected by that disruption. Necessary actions are taken within 2 hours, alternative sourcing options evaluated, most suitable ones selected, a few calls to the customer site, and the fire was stopped before it gets to the entire supply chain, maybe causing millions of dollars of damage. So this story is actually also reachable from our website, and I'm pretty sure Charmaine will be able to share the link with our audience in case they want to learn more about this. But this was a true story.
Oh, that's interesting. Yes, as organizations and communities around the world are impacted by COVID-19, I guess we are learning each day how we can apply technology to be productive, collaborative, and maintain a sense of community. Melis, we have been through a whole gamut of issues, and I'm particularly grateful for you that you have answered these, because these are the sort of concerns people who have been reading as widely as they want about COVID-19 and how to tackle supply chain disruptions will have in their minds. And I'm particularly grateful that you helped discuss and shed light on the multiple challenges our clients are confronted with at the same time. On the one hand, they need to protect their people, protect their business, and protect their revenues. At the same time, they need to make sure they plan for the recovery as they come out of this crisis, making sure there is transparency, visibility, resilience, and real-time collaboration in their supply chains. Well, I hope these thoughts are helpful for everyone on this webinar as you work through the crisis yourself. I wish you lots of health, lots of success, and lots of wisdom in the coming weeks and months. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melis and Sanjay, for the wonderful and insightful discussion. And now we're moving on. We will be going on into the Q&A session. So while the webinar was in session, there were just a handful of questions. And yeah, so the first one here I have is for Sanjay. Sanjay, one of our attendee here is asking, so let me bring the question up. Our attendee is asking, so under the current circumstances, is ICRON helping companies in specific ways to tackle these challenges and perhaps retool themselves?
Yes, Charmaine, thank you for the question. As companies plan for the recovery, we are starting to see actions being taken not only to mitigate impacts from the pandemic, but also to build resilience against future shocks. And ICRON is at the heart of these discussions. As a business, we are approaching the situation with empathy and urgency. Support measures are being introduced to companies on a case-by-case basis, as every situation is different. Our commercial models are highly adaptable, providing companies with much lower upfront costs than before and faster deployment. Of course, details of the support measures that we have introduced can be shared with those who are interested.
Right, thank you, Sanjay. Here's another question that from the audience as well, also for you, Sanjay. This one is asking how quickly can companies connect to the ICRON platform?
Okay, it's quite a common question. Well, depending on the scope, we can help companies connect quickly and effectively for as fast as under 3 months.
Right. Okay. We still have about 5 minutes or so to go, and I'll be taking any last questions that you may have. So if you have anything you'd like to ask, please feel free to drop us a question, and you can do so on the GoToWebinar panel on your right. You can see that there is a question window. Click on it, and you can submit a question over to us right there. I'm just going to give everyone just a couple of seconds if you have any last questions for us.
And I would like to thank everybody joining us today, and I wish you health and safety. Stay at home as you can, as much as you can.
Yeah, we all have to. Looks like there are no more questions coming in. I guess this should be all for our Q&A session. So as we come to the end of our webinar, I would like to thank all of you for your attention, and we hope that you have enjoyed the session as well. And just a note also, we will be sending across a recording of this webinar to all of you in the coming days, so do keep a lookout for it. And if you would like to learn or know more, or you still have some questions that you would like for us to answer, please feel free to send us an email. My email is just right across the screen, charmaine.liu@icrontech.com. So yeah, feel free to reach out to me. And with that, I would like to thank you all once again, and we hope to have you with us again at our next webinar. Thank you and goodbye, everybody.